In a quiet corner of the city, where forgotten buildings rot beneath flickering streetlights, lives a man most have long since erased from memory. Once a warrior, once a hero, now just a shadow. His name, barely spoken. His medals, locked away in dust-covered drawers. To the world, he is a relic. A broken echo of a time no one dares to remember. But the thing about forgotten men is that they never forget. When chaos knocks again, not with fanfare, but in silence, in shadows, through corruption and blood, it's not the young they call. It's not the strong or the brave. It's the man who's already been through hell and came back breathing. He doesn't wear a uniform anymore. He doesn't salute the flag. But deep down, the fight still burns in him, raw, scarred, and unstoppable. And this time, he's not fighting for orders. He's fighting for something far more fragile, redemption. The night was heavy with a silence that felt almost deliberate, as if the city itself had paused, waiting for something inevitable to break. No wind stirred the curtains. No voices echoed through the alleyways. Even the distant hum of traffic had dulled to a faint murmur, like the world had lowered its volume just to listen to his breathing. Daniel sat motionless in a broken chair by the window, his silhouette swallowed by the dim amber light of a flickering desk lamp. Outside, rain threatened but never came, leaving the sky swollen and tense, just like him. His fingers gripped a chipped glass of cheap whiskey, but he hadn't taken a sip in minutes. He wasn't drinking to forget tonight. He was remembering. And it was killing him slowly. The apartment around him was more a grave than a home, walls stained with water damage and time, shelves half empty like someone had left in a hurry years ago and never returned. Photographs, long since turned gray, stared at him from crooked frames. In one of them, a woman smiled. In another, a younger version of himself held a child. He couldn't bear to look at either. He rubbed his temples with shaking fingers, the memories clawing their way back through the silence. Gunfire. Screams. A deal gone wrong. A name whispered just before a man died, his name. The blade in the smoke. That was what they used to call him, back when he mattered, back when he was the kind of man others feared in places without laws. But he hadn't touched a weapon in almost 3 years. He had buried that life, or so he told himself. The truth was simpler, crueler, he had run. After the mission in Prague, after what happened in the safe house, after her, he couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't carry the weight. Couldn't bear the blood on his hands or the ghosts that haunted every sleepless night. And yet, here he was. Because the silence tonight was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was warning him. A shift in the atmosphere, subtle but sure. The kind of shift a man like Daniel couldn't ignore. His instincts, dulled by regret and time, were waking again, scratching at the back of his mind like a knife against bone. His eyes flicked to the door. Just for a second. Just long enough. Someone was coming. He didn't know who. He didn't know why. But he knew what it meant. He stood slowly, joints cracking, heart hammering harder than it should. His hand hovered over the drawer in the kitchen counter. Inside, beneath a folded dish towel, lay a pistol, old but clean. Familiar. He didn't want to open it. He had promised himself he wouldn't. But men like Daniel never got to choose peace. Not really. Only the illusion of it. And illusions never lasted. Daniel's hand hovered over the pistol for a heartbeat longer than it should have. His fingertips brushed the cold steel, and in that instant, a memory flared to life, a flash of smoke, a scream cut short, a face he could never forget. The gun wasn't just a weapon, it was a trigger to everything he'd buried. But the moment called for action, not reflection. He clenched his jaw, closed his fingers around the grip, and drew the weapon from the drawer in one smooth, silent motion. Then came the sound. At first, he thought he imagined it, the quiet creak of a floorboard out in the hallway. His body went rigid. The building was old, yes. It made noises. But this wasn't the groan of old wood or the shuffle of a neighbor. This sound was intentional. Measured. Like someone trying not to be heard. Daniel moved slowly toward the door, gun drawn, every nerve in his body taut. His training came back not in thoughts, but in instincts, years of muscle memory overriding the fear curling coldly in his gut. He pressed his back to the wall beside the door, head tilted slightly, listening. Then a knock, soft, too soft. Not the kind of knock that demanded entrance. It was the kind that requested, even coaxed. A chill slipped down his spine. No one who came with good news knocked like that. And then a voice. A woman's voice. "Daniel. I know you're in there." The sound of it stopped time. The air in his lungs turned to ice. He hadn't heard that voice in years, not since the operation in Tangier went south, not since the blood-soaked betrayal that shattered everything. He'd convinced himself she was dead. Or worse, that she'd never cared at all. "Elena," he murmured under his breath. The name tasted like ash. His mind flooded with questions, how she found him, why she came, whether this was a trap, but he forced them aside. Focus. First rule, survive. He gripped the pistol tighter and edged toward the peephole, but instinct pulled him back. If she was here, they might not be far behind. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice a rough rasp, thick with both caution and disbelief. "I wouldn't be," came the answer, "unless I had a reason." Her voice was calm, but not cold. Firm, but not cruel. Still, something in its tone unsettled him. It wasn't the voice of the woman he'd once trusted. It was older. Sharper. Hardened by years of silence and shadows. Then came the words that twisted the knife. "They're coming for you." His heart slammed against his ribs. His mind reeled. He wanted to believe she was lying. But Elena had never lied with her voice. Only with her eyes. The lock clicked as he opened the door just a crack. Rain whispered in from the hallway, clinging to her coat and painting her face in glistening droplets. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, everything in him faltered. She was real. Here. Alive. And yet, she was no longer the Elena he knew. She stood like someone prepared to run again, or fight to the death. Without waiting for an invitation, she stepped inside. Daniel didn't stop her. His gun remained steady in his grip, but his hand trembled slightly. He hated that she could still unnerve him this way. "You vanished," he said. 3 years. No word. No trace. I thought. You thought I was dead," she finished for him, her tone unreadable. "I had to be." "Why come back now?" "Because Prague wasn't the end," she said grimly. "It was the beginning." She threw something onto the table, a flash drive. It slid to a halt beside a worn, water-stained photo of the two of them, taken long ago during a mission in Marrakesh. Back when things were still black and white. Before they were both swallowed by gray. "What's on that?" he asked, not taking his eyes off her. "Everything," she said. "Proof of what they did. What we did. And who's still cleaning it up." His stomach turned. He wanted to run. To deny it all. But he knew better. There was no running from the truth. Not anymore. "They'll kill you," she said. "They'll kill both of us if we don't move." Daniel stared at her, haunted and uncertain, his grip loosening just slightly on the pistol. He'd buried his past. But now, standing in his living room, dripping rain and urgency, was the ghost he could never forget, and she'd come not for revenge, but for redemption. Or maybe, something far more dangerous. The tiny flash drive sat on Daniel's table like it had a pulse, silent, still, but radiating danger. His eyes fixed on it, unmoving, as if he were staring at something that could unravel everything he had spent years trying to bury. It was the kind of object that didn't scream, didn't shout, but whispered ruin in your ear. Behind him, Elena paced slowly, the rhythm of her steps betraying her inner storm. Her hair was damp from the rain, clinging to her neck, her clothes still dripping. She hadn't even bothered to change, as if fleeing from something so close she couldn't afford the luxury of comfort. When she finally stopped, it was at the window, her back to him, her fingers parting the curtain just enough to glance outside. "You were followed," Daniel said quietly, not as a question, but as a confirmation of what he already knew. She didn't respond. The silence between them stretched thin, taut like a wire about to snap. Daniel's jaw clenched as he turned to the table. His hand hovered above the drive, fingers trembling slightly. It wasn't fear, not exactly, more like the heaviness of responsibility pressing down on him. He'd known, somewhere deep down, that this wouldn't last, that the quiet life he'd built here was a lie written in disappearing ink. And now it was vanishing right before his eyes. "How long has this been going on?" he asked, his voice low. 2 months, Elena replied, her voice hoarse. "Maybe more. I picked up the first trace in Istanbul. Then Vienna. Everywhere I went, someone was one step ahead. People were dying. Clean kills. No traces. I thought I was chasing a name, but then I realized, they were chasing me." She turned to him now, her face pale, eyes burning. "Then I found this." She nodded toward the flash drive, her expression hardening. "It was hidden inside a dead drop. I nearly missed it." Daniel plugged the drive into the laptop on the table, his hands methodical despite the tension coiling in his chest. A prompt blinked onto the screen, asking for a password. "I cracked part of it," Elena said, stepping forward. Her hand brushed his shoulder as she reached for the keyboard, and for a moment, the heat of her touch jolted through him, an echo of something lost. She typed quickly, a sequence of numbers and symbols that looked more like code than language. The screen flickered. A folder appeared. Black Veil, Phase 2. Daniel clicked it open. The first file was a photograph. It stopped him cold. He stared. It was him. Taken from across the street, 2 weeks ago, walking out of the market with a bag of groceries. A routine moment. Innocent. Forgettable. Except it was captured, labeled, time-stamped. He scrolled. More photos. Him entering his apartment. Leaving the gym. Walking the back alley shortcut he thought no one knew about. Then Elena, in Paris, then Warsaw. Grainy surveillance images. Crowded streets. Hotel lobbies. Airport terminals. Someone had been tracking them for months. Meticulously. Patiently. A slow hunt. Daniel's breath came heavier now, each file clicking open like a warning shot. Then the documents. Internal memos, operation summaries, redacted names, and worse, familiar code names. Code names that should have been locked away forever. Missions erased from every server, every memory. He whispered the words before he even realized he was speaking. "This is a list." Elena stepped beside him, her voice a whisper. "A list of assets they're eliminating." He looked up at her. The shadows on her face couldn't hide the weight she was carrying. She had known. For how long, he couldn't guess. But she'd been running not just from death, she'd been running with guilt, too. "We're on it," she said. He closed his eyes for a moment. Everything inside him wanted to retreat, to pull away. But his instincts took over, the soldier in him, the spy, the man who once lived in shadows. When he opened his eyes again, something in them had changed. "Why come to me?" he asked. She hesitated. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because saying it would make it real. "Because you're the only one I trust," she said finally. Daniel stood, the chair scraping softly behind him. He moved to the wall and slid open a hidden panel. Inside, 2 duffel bags, pre-packed. Emergency kits. One filled with untraceable cash, the other with passports, IDs, a few weapons. He tossed one to her without a word. "Then we move now," he said. "Because if they've been watching us this closely, they're probably already here," Elena finished, her eyes flicking back toward the window. A low rumble of thunder shook the glass. And then, headlights. Far down the street. Slow. Deliberate. Daniel's muscles tightened. His mind shifted into the rhythm he hadn't used in years, calculating exit routes, estimating time, preparing for contact. He looked at Elena, the woman who once saved his life, and who had now dragged him back into the fire. She met his gaze. No more running. No more hiding. Together, again, not by choice, but by necessity. And this time, it was war. The soft growl of an engine pierced the stillness of the night. It was subtle, almost respectful, as if the driver didn't want to wake the sleeping world. But to Daniel, the sound was as jarring as a scream. He tensed, his muscles coiling. He moved to the window and slowly peeled back the edge of the curtain. The street below, usually bathed in orange street lamp haze, now shimmered with the glow of a black SUV pulling up with deliberate slowness. No headlights. No plates. No sound but the ticking of the engine cooling. His pulse quickened. "They're here," he murmured. Across the room, Elena froze. She had been typing on the laptop, scanning documents and logs Daniel had recovered, but at the sound of his voice, her fingers stilled. She turned toward him slowly, her expression already shifting, not from confusion, but recognition. She had been expecting this moment, even if she had hoped it wouldn't come so soon. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "Too careful. Too late. They found us." A silence stretched between them, heavy with decisions unspoken. Then they moved. Fast. Daniel reached the table in 2 strides, slammed the laptop shut, and ripped the flash drive from its port. He jammed it into the inner lining of his jacket, right behind the Kevlar. His eyes scanned the room like a wolf scenting blood. Every movement was clean, practiced. There was no time for emotion. No time to panic. Only precision. Elena grabbed her satchel, checked the loaded pistol hidden in the side pocket, and slung it over her shoulder. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steel. "If they breach the door, we split. Meet at fallback 3. No, Daniel's voice was sharp. "We stay together. They'll expect us to divide." A noise, faint, but unmistakable, echoed up from the stairwell outside. Clack. The slow, methodical shift of a silencer being mounted to a barrel. Elena's heart pounded. She could feel it in her throat, tight and fluttering. She clenched her fists to steady herself. "We have maybe 20 seconds, Daniel said grimly. "If they're inside the building." The door handle twitched. Then a slam. The wood buckled inward as boots stomped up the stairs. Elena didn't need further prompting. Daniel had already moved to the far end of the apartment, where a faded cabinet stood crookedly against the wall. He yanked it aside, revealing a metal maintenance panel screwed loosely into the drywall. In a flash, he removed it and gestured her in. The crawlspace behind was narrow and pitch black, the kind of place that made claustrophobia bloom like a storm in the chest. But there was no other way. She dropped to her knees and crawled in, the cold metal biting into her skin. Behind her, Daniel followed, pulling the cabinet back into place just as the front door of the apartment exploded inward with a bone-rattling crack. Shards of wood sprayed across the floor as two masked figures stormed in, rifles raised, scanning the shadows. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the whisper of boots on tile. Inside the crawlspace, Elena's breath was short and ragged. Her arms trembled as she crawled, scraped, and pushed forward through the tight, suffocating dark. Every inch felt like a mile. Every sound from the apartment echoed louder than it should. She didn't dare speak. Her mind raced, not just with fear, but with a burning clarity. She hated running. Hated hiding. Hated the way they were hunted like animals while the people responsible stayed untouchable in boardrooms and bunkers. Daniel caught up beside her. His hand brushed her shoulder, a quick touch, reassuring. His breathing was steady, but she could feel the tension rolling off him. Not panic, control. Cold, honed control. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of failing. They crawled until the maintenance tunnel opened into the neighboring building's basement, a forgotten place of rusted pipes and dripping condensation. The scent of mold and iron filled the air. Elena stumbled to her feet, pressing her hand against the wall to steady herself. "We're not going to outrun them forever," she whispered, voice low but burning. "They'll just keep coming." Daniel nodded. He was already checking the flash drive hidden in his jacket, fingers running over the fabric like a soldier checking his last weapon. "Then we make them afraid of what we know." She blinked. "You mean leak it?" "All of it. Names, dates, black sites. Turn this from a manhunt into a scandal. If the world knows, they lose control." She hesitated. Her mind reeled with the risk. "That could get us killed." "They're already trying to kill us," he said, eyes locked on hers. "At least this way, we make it count." Suddenly, a metallic clang echoed from the far end of the basement, a door opening. Voices. Flashlights. No time. Daniel grabbed Elena's hand, tighter this time, not just to guide, but to protect. "Run." And this time, she didn't hesitate. They ran, not just to flee, but to survive. The corridor stretched endlessly ahead, dimly lit by flickering bulbs that cast trembling shadows along the walls. Elena's legs moved almost of their own will, driven not by strength but sheer willpower. Her heart thundered inside her chest, not from exertion alone but from the raw terror clawing at her every nerve. Behind them, the echoes of boots pounded closer, heavy, fast, relentless. Daniel's presence beside her was the only tether to reason in the chaos. His hand brushed hers briefly as they turned a sharp corner, a silent reminder, "Stay close. I'm here." There was no time for words. Each second was precious. He glanced over his shoulder once, just enough to gauge the enemy's distance, then motioned sharply toward a door on their left. "In here," he breathed, barely audible over the pounding in her ears. They burst through the door and into a small, cluttered storage room. The stench of mold and rust hit Elena like a wave. She staggered slightly, clutching the edge of a dented filing cabinet to steady herself, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The room was a dead end, no windows, no visible exits. Trapped. Her stomach twisted. Daniel, ever composed, scanned the space rapidly. His eyes landed on a ventilation grate half obscured by stacked boxes. "There," he said, voice tight. "Help me move these." Elena rushed to his side, adrenaline dulling the ache in her arms as they shoved the heavy boxes aside. Her hands were trembling, not just from fatigue but from fear. "They're coming. They're right behind us. We won't make it. She couldn't die here. Not after everything. Not when the truth they carried could burn the lies to the ground." Daniel dropped to his knees and began prying at the grate with a rusted screwdriver pulled from his boot. "This'll get us into the ventilation shaft. Might be tight, but it leads to the upper stairwell." "How do you know?" Elena asked, her voice cracking. "Because I used it before," he replied, eyes focused, hands working feverishly. "Places like this, they always have forgotten paths." Boom! The door behind them shook under the force of a kick. Elena flinched violently. Her pulse roared in her ears. "They're breaking in." "I know," Daniel muttered. "Just a few more seconds." Seconds. That's all they had. Elena's gaze darted to the door, where the bolt had begun to bend inward. Every breath felt like it could be her last. She reached down, gripped Daniel's arm. "If they get in." "They won't," he snapped, voice steeled with something deeper than confidence, something like desperation. "I won't let them." With a final wrench, the grate popped free. Daniel shoved it aside and gestured. "Go. Now." Elena hesitated only a moment, long enough to hear the door splinter behind her, before crawling into the narrow duct. Cold metal scraped her skin. The walls seemed to close around her, claustrophobic and silent except for the pounding of her heart. Daniel followed, pulling the grate back into place just as the door crashed open. She heard it all, the shouts, the gunfire tearing into the room they'd just abandoned. Dust rained down into the shaft with every shot. Her breathing was ragged. Her hands trembled beneath her as she crawled, but she didn't stop. Daniel's voice came from behind her, calm, measured. "Keep going. Just a few meters more." The shaft twisted, and finally they reached a panel. Daniel pushed it open with his shoulder, and the two of them tumbled into a stairwell one floor above. Elena collapsed against the wall, sweat soaking her back, chest heaving. She wanted to cry, to scream, to curl up and let the adrenaline crash, but there was no time. Daniel hauled her up. "Alleyways this way. I have a bike stashed." They raced down the stairs. Elena felt her limbs beginning to fail her, each step heavier than the last. Her vision blurred, but Daniel's voice, low, urgent, pulled her forward. Outside, the night greeted them like a slap, cold, sharp, unforgiving. The alley was empty, silent for now. Daniel ran to a tarp and yanked it back, revealing a black motorcycle beneath. Elena turned to speak, to thank him, to say something, when a red dot appeared on her chest. "Don't move," a soldier barked from the shadows, rifle trained on her. She froze. Time slowed. The air felt like ice in her lungs. Her eyes locked on the weapon. One twitch, one mistake, and it would all be over. But Daniel didn't hesitate. In a single, fluid motion, he raised his silenced pistol and fired. The shot struck the soldier's shoulder. He dropped with a pained yell, rifle clattering to the ground. "Helmet. Now!" Daniel shouted. Elena obeyed, jamming the helmet over her head and climbing onto the back of the bike. Her arms wrapped around him, trembling. She barely had time to brace before the engine roared and they peeled away, the alley blurring into a smear of shadows and wind. Behind them, another set of headlights flared to life. "They've got a van on us," she cried into the wind. Daniel's voice was low, grim. "We don't stop. Not now." She tightened her grip as they surged forward, weaving between buildings, tires shrieking against the asphalt. Her eyes stung with tears, not of sadness, but of terror and fury. "We're not just running," she realized. "We're fighting. We're a threat now. A symbol. And symbols don't die quietly." The city sleeps tonight, never knowing how close it came to burning. There's no headline. No statue. No applause. Just a man walking away, slower now, a little more tired, but not broken. He didn't win for medals. He didn't return to prove anything. He came back because someone had to. And in the quiet aftermath, as the rain begins to fall and the neon lights flicker in the distance, he fades once more into the dark, not because he's hiding, but because that's where men like him belong. In silence. In shadows. In legend. The world may never know his name. But somewhere, deep in its veins, it beats a little stronger, because of him.